Hello, my name is Bre Schueller, and I work as a fire management specialist for the Wildland Fire Management Research, Development, and Application Group. Today, I will be walking you through how to leverage the Compare Weather module in the Interagency Fuel Treatment Decision Support System, or IFTDSS, to produce fire behavior outputs under a variety of weather and fuel moisture scenarios, and compare the outputs on a map and in tabular form within the application. To start, though, I have a few slides to review some IFTDSS basics. So what is IFTDSS? For those of you who aren't familiar, IFTDSS is a web-based application designed to address the planning needs of users, regardless of affiliation. IFTDSS is open to everyone. It provides the ability to model fire behavior across the landscape under a variety of weather conditions and produces summaries of the results with maps, graphs, and tables. Users can test a variety of fuel treatment impacts on fire behavior and compare results to determine which treatments best meet project goals and objectives. The IFTDSS framework hosts common authoritative data, tools, and models, and can be used at a variety of scales from individual treatment units to landscape level. Finally, as of last year, IFTDSS provides risk-based fuels management decision support with the quantitative wildfire risk assessment. So how is IFTDSS being used? IFTDSS is currently being leveraged by the user base in a variety of ways. Fuel specialists involved in NEPA planning are using the reports IFTDSS produces in analysis and planning. We know of prescribed fire practitioners using model outputs and landscape summary reports and burn plans, and others are using the application to help prioritize fuel treatment areas, and some have used the quantitative wildfire risk assessment module to assess risk across management units. And this is just to name a few. We're always interested to hear how the tools in IFTDSS are being used in fuels treatment decision support. Please don't hesitate to reach out and let us know how you end up using IFTDSS to support your work. Okay, now on to the fun part. Now I'm going to walk you through how the Compare Weather module in IFTDSS can help you in your prescribed fire planning. In this demo, we will look at how 5 different weather and fuel moisture scenarios impact fire behavior within a proposed prescribed burn unit. We will run landscape fire behavior, the model. We'll compare inputs in a tabular form in a table, and we'll view and compare the outputs on the map. One quick note, though, before we get started. So prior to this demo, in full disclosure, in order to squeeze the demo into the allotted time frame, I did do some prep to get us ready to look at everything that we can look at here. So just a few things to note. I did upload my burn unit shapefile into the system via the Map Studio in IFTDSS. And then I created a land fire landscape with the landscape tools widget, again, in the Map Studio. Once the landscape was created, I ran the landscape fire behavior model several times to produce a bunch of outputs for us to look at during the demo. But I will show you how to run additional models during the live demo. So with that, I think we can get going. Okay, so when you first log into IFTDSS, you are presented with a home page with some quick links to kind of get you started. And then I want to point out that one of the primary ways that you can navigate the application is through the links on the navigation bar up here at the top. So you've got My Home, which is where we're at now, the cycle, which is what we'll access to look at the Compare Weather module. You've got your workspace where all of the resources reside that you create in IFTDSS for retrieval. The Map Studio, self-explanatory, that's where you go to the map to look at all of your spatial data. And then the playground. And the playground is where you spend a lot of time running models. IFTDSS also houses the fuel treatment effectiveness monitoring system, and we will not cover that today. So with that, also I'll point out that we've got very robust help in the Help Center. And so all of the steps that I did prior to this demo to set us up here, you can find tutorials and videos and all kinds of good stuff about how to do what I did to get us to this point in the demo. So with that, I'm going to go on over to the cycle. And in the cycle part of IFTDSS, it's basically representing a planning cycle here with the petals of this, this wheel that we have here. And so the Compare Weather module resides both in strategic planning and implementation planning. I'll access it today through strategic planning. So when you click on these petals, you get different options or different cards. And I've been referring to these as modules. So here under strategic planning, you can see that we've got several modules to access. Our quantitative risk assessment also resides here, but today we're going to look at Compare Weather. So when I click on this link, I get taken to a form, and this form is where we enter all of the information that we need to begin our comparison. The first thing that you have to do here is select the model output that you want to compare. In Compare Weather, you can look at model outputs from the 3 different models that IFTDSS has, which is landscape fire behavior, MTT fire spread, and landscape burn probability. For the purposes of this exercise, we're going to focus on comparing model outputs from landscape fire behavior, excuse me. But just keep in mind that you can compare MTT fire spread under different weather scenarios as well. Or landscape burn probability for that matter. So when I select landscape fire behavior, the second drop-down box becomes available to me. And what this is doing is asking me, you know, what model output do you want to start with? So remember, you know, I'd said I had run several models before this demo. So we had a bunch of stuff to look at. We wouldn't have to wait for the model to run. The project that I'm using is called Dumbbell. And here you can see all of the model outputs that I can access. Now, all of my projects are in here. All of my landscape fire behavior outputs are in here from other projects I've worked on. We're going to focus on Dumbbell. So when I select, I'm going to select this Dumbbell 3 mph dry fuel scenario. So this is the, refers to the inputs that I use to help guide me here. So when I select that, the next boxes become available to me, and the box directly under says select additional model outputs to compare, and I can select up to 4. So this is where I can then look at the different scenarios that I've set up. These are all of my landscape fire behavior outputs that I ran with the same landscape. It's very important to note that only outputs that were run with the same landscape are available to me to ensure that I'm comparing apples to apples here. And so I'm gonna select a few of these. I have, looks like here I've run several scenarios with different wind speeds and different fuel moisture levels. So in this scenario, I just want to look at, I want to compare my outputs with dry fuels across the board, but with different wind speeds to see how the wind speed is going to affect fire behavior in my burn unit and in the area of my burn unit. So I have 3 mph. I'm going to select a 6 mph, 9 mph, again, focusing first here on the dry fuel scenario, 12 mph and 15. I also have an 18 in there, but you can only select 5. And so I'm going to scroll down here. This again is listing the ones that I just selected. I can delete those from this list. It will not delete them from up here. But if I just wanted to say get rid of the 15, I can click the trash can and it kicks it out of my list, but I can still reselect it if I want to up here. And then the arrows also let you reorder these outputs. And so if you scroll down, you can see that here are our fire behavior outputs, and we're looking at flame length specifically. Now, if I wanted to switch to different outputs that I'm getting from landscape fire behavior, I can do that here. So if I wanted to look at rates of spread and what the differences are in rates of spread given different wind speeds, I can do that. If I wanted to look at fire line intensity, heat per unit area, or crown fire activity, I can also do that. You'll start to notice that some of the outputs, your inputs aren't really having much effect on. In this case, crown fire is one of them. It's really not being impacted much by the wind speed changes. We'll go back to flame length. Here, though, you can see that flame length is definitely being impacted by our wind speed. And so this is where you can start to, tease out when you're planning your burn, what are your thresholds? What is going to be your low, moderate, or optimum and high end of your prescription based on resources, based on fuels, and all of the other things that you're considering when you're writing your burn plan. And so here I just use this zoom to AOI. AOI is area of interest. In this case, the dumbbell burn unit is our area of interest. And so that plops it on the map. And then I can get a even better idea of possibly where problem areas might be for that matter. Where do I have areas where my flame lengths are really high, close to the holding line? Is that going to warrant maybe some changes to my holding plan? Do I have areas outside of my burn unit that have more extreme fire behavior, that I need to consider in my contingency planning? And so, and maybe that's a cause for looking at a little bit, lower end of a prescription for that burn unit. So these are just kind of the things you can start to look at and tease out as you're doing your comparison. And so you can see that as I changed, rates of spread, flame length, the legend's changing. So going back to flame length, this is in feet. So the greens are going to be your lower flame lengths. And as you get, warmer tones, that means you're getting more extreme flame lengths. And so if I scroll down a little bit, I'm also seeing the table of my inputs. So this kind of helps me get an idea, and they're in line, obviously, with the thumbnail maps to help me understand the differences. So in this case, you can see how it broke up the wind speed. This was the variance in these outputs was 3 mile per hour wind versus 6 versus 9 versus 12 versus 15, with everything else being held constant. There might be a case that maybe you want to look at your lower end of the prescription, with the lower wind speeds that maybe you have higher fuel moistures, and maybe that's a more typical scenario for you, and vice versa. So just kind of giving you an idea of some of the different things that you can look at as you're playing with the different inputs and running models. Now, if I wanted to say I liked, this, dumbbell 12 mile per hour, maybe I did want to do the same wind speed, but I want to see what that looks like with a little bit more wet fuels, then I can use this copy run. I'll go ahead and do that. And it's giving me a warning here in red that I haven't saved this session. If I want, I can save this grouping of model outputs and come back to it later. But it's also just telling me, hey, if you want to do this, we're going to take you to the playground to run that model. And so if I click yes, it now moved me. So in the nav bar, I'm here in playground, and you can see that it copied that run for me. So I see my 12 mile per hour, I've got Finney, everything is pre-populated. And if I wanted to say, I want to do this one, but I'd like to run it with a little bit more moist fuel moisture scenario, then I can do that. And I can say, I want to try, 7, 8, 9, and I don't want these herbaceous and woody live fuels to be as cured. So I'm going to bump that up. And then it renames it for you so you can run it, but you can come down here and say, moist scenario with a 12 mile per hour wind, run it, and then it's going to put it in your queue here. You can see this is the one we just created, and it's submitted, and it's going to run. But I'm going to go back to the scenario that we were looking at. And this time I'm going to choose the moderate. I also already ran these with a moderate scenario. So in this case, I chose the 3 mile per hour moderate fuels, moderately dry fuels. Go ahead and get this set up. And so you can see here, same wind, variance in the wind speed, but here we've got a little bit more moist scenario. Now I can start mixing and matching these if I want to, and I can say, I want to look at what the 3 mile per hour moderate fuel scenario versus the 3 mile per hour dry fuel, what that looks like. And I can turn these off, and let's look at a couple of these compared, the 9 mile per hour, and then just with the 15 dry. And so here we can see how it parsed those out for us. So we've got our low wind speeds in these first two, with a wetter scenario with our fuel moistures, and then a drier scenario. You see there's really, in terms of flame length, there's not too much difference between those two. Bumping over to the next one up, where you got the 9 mile per hour wind with a dry fuel moisture scenario versus a wet fuel moisture scenario, there's much more of a difference. And then of course the 15 mile per hour wind with the dry scenario, even more of a difference. So again, you can start to tease out thresholds with this. And so now I want to show you what this view on map looks like. So if I want to look at these a little bit bigger to get a little bit better idea of what we got, I can click this view on map, and it's going to open up the map studio for me. It's already preloaded and kind of copied over this thumbnail bar. So I've got access to these to switch these around as I need to. I can change the layer to display, and I can also add, which I'm going to go ahead and do, and add my dumbbell area of interest, my dumbbell burn unit. And so it's also added all of these outputs to my layers list. And so I can turn them on and off here. But what's kind of cool about this is this thumbnail bar also lets me turn these on and off. So if I click on this one, say I just kind of want to investigate this 3 mile per hour moderate scenario first, I clicked on it, and then you can see over here that it turned all of the other layers off and kept that one on. And I can expand my layers list here, excuse my zooming, and look at any of the other, I can switch the other outputs in the layers list as well as up here in the bar. If I wanted to start looking at these in comparison with one another on the map, I can turn more than one on. So I'll turn on my 3 mile per hour if I wanted to do a little bit more investigating. So I've got my 3 mile per hour scenario, dry and moderate on. And if you wanted to hide this thumbnail bar, you can do that with the little arrow. And IFTDSS has this swipe tool where you can use the swipe bar to kind of see where the differences are. So if I zoom in here and I'm swiping, I can see, the dry scenario is over the top. And when I'm swiping, I can kind of see where the differences are between these. Can maybe turn one on that's a little bit more dramatic. And you can start to see the differences here with the two. So this is the 15 mile per hour versus the 3. And you can start to really see where the changes are happening. Further, if you wanted to drill down, you could add the landscape. So I just added the landscape to the map. Go ahead and turn the swipe tool off. And if I wanted to use the identify tool, I can click on specific points where maybe I've seen significant changes and I want to understand why that's happening. I'm going to get with my identify tool, I can start to see, again, here's the 3 mile per hour compared with the 15. And then here's the land fire data laying underneath that. So it's telling me, what fuel model. So maybe where I'm seeing with the higher winds over 25-foot flame length, I'm in a shrub fuel model there. So That's a way that you can kind of drill down and see why you're seeing major differences in your fire behavior between the different scenarios. And so if I want to go back to the form, that's easy. I just click return to form, or if you see, you can see this little arrow up in the upper right hand corner. Either of these will pop you right back to where you were. Basically just kind of envision it as that it's sliding this over back and forth. If I click that, I go back to the map. If I click this, I go back to the form, and I can adjust these as I need to, and that'll be reflected in the map. And so after you kind of go through your process, you can take these sets of outputs if you know you want to come back to this. And I'll do an example where I want to save my moderate scenario as a grouping. And so if I have my 3 mph moderate and I want to save my 6, keep in mind, it's not all of your models are safe in your workspace, all these outputs. This is just saving this specific set of outputs. And those take a little bit to load. Then I can come down here. And name it appropriately and click save. And then it's telling me that I've saved this scenario. And this is the link to the folder that I made for the presentation. So if I click on that, you can actually see what it looks like in the workspace. So here I'm over in the workspace. I've got this set of compare weather outputs for landscape fire behavior. I can edit that. I can copy it and make a new one from it. Also in the workspace, if I click view input, it's going to let me see if I couldn't remember which one it is. It's like, oh yeah, this is the one where I had the moderate fuel moisture scenario with the increasing wind speeds. And so that is compare weather. There's a lot of cool things you can do with this. This is a great tool to help calibrate landscapes. It's a great tool to help refine prescribed burn prescriptions. It's a great tool to look at where you might need to adjust contingency plans, holding plans for your prescribed fires. And I'm sure there's lots of other things out there that our users will discover about using this tool. So that concludes the demo. Let me go back to my presentation. So again, I encourage folks to get in and check it out, and lots of great information in our help content. So if you want to learn more about IFTDSS, visit the IFTDSS Help Center, check out videos. We've got a lot of videos on YouTube. We've got a forum. If you've got ideas for us, we're always checking that, and that's actually, we're still actually developing the application. So that's where we get some good ideas from our users to think about implementing in the future. It's a great place to interact with other IFTDSS users. And then, of course, if you have any issues, you can always submit a ticket to our help center. And with that, I appreciate folks' time. And if you have any questions for me, feel free to reach out direct at the email on the screen. And thanks again.